For all its beauty and splendor, the wilderness can be a cruel teacher. In the grand tapestry of existence, the notion of cheating death beckons us to embrace our innate resilience and indomitable spirit. Like intrepid explorers of the cosmos, we venture into the unknown, defying the very boundaries of mortality that have held sway over countless generations. The symphony of life and its crescendo of challenges offer us a chance to compose a magnum opus of courage, determination, and unwavering resolve. In the crucible of a survival situation where the elements conspire against us and challenges seem insurmountable, we discover the boundless wellspring of strength that resides within. It is in these dire moments that our true nature emerges, and we transcend the limitations we once believed defined us. Every trial and tribulation becomes a crucible of transformation, forging our spirit like steel in the hottest of fires. We learn to wield the tools of resourcefulness, resilience, and adaptability, fashioning a shield against the storms that threaten to overwhelm us. In the heart of adversity, we discover that courage is not the absence of fear, but the audacious act of standing firm despite its presence. The following stories embody the resilience of the human spirit that truly shines in these moments. It is in the crucible of survival situations that we unearth the most profound truths about ourselves. We discover that we are not merely survivors. We are thrivers, warriors of the soul, and masters of our destiny. Please click the subscribe and like buttons. This is the Outdoor Disasters, I Shouldn't Be Alive. Stories of Cheating Death Marathon. For Jim Davidson and Mike Price, the nightmare of falling into a crevasse would become a reality. Jim met 23-year-old Mike Price in the fall of 1986 while they were graduate students at Colorado State University. Jim was earning a master's degree in geology and Mike in English. Mike had grown up in Colorado and was an experienced mountain climber. He taught college students to learn to climb through the Outward Bound program. Jim and Mike dreamed of climbing Mount Everest one day. After summiting several mountains in Colorado and South America, Jim and Mike decided to climb Mount Rainier. They chose the more difficult Liberty Ridge route on the north side of the mountain. On the first day of summer, June 21st, 1992, after 3 days of climbing rope together, they reached the 14,400-foot summit. Pictures were taken, and they headed back down, looking forward to a shower and a steak. As they crossed a glacier at the 1,500 feet elevation, just an hour from the car, the snow suddenly collapsed under Jim and he fell into a crevasse, a large crack in the glacier. Mike, 50 feet back and attached by a safety rope, dug in to break Jim's fall, but he too was pulled into the crevasse. They fell 80 feet and landed on a 2-foot by 7-foot ledge. Mike died within minutes. Miraculously, Jim wasn't seriously hurt due to Mike's attempt to stop the fall. Shock, fear, guilt, and grief gripped Jim as he sat in the dark with the body of his dead friend. He blamed himself. He had no idea what to do. Instinctively, he yelled for help, but he knew no one would ever hear him. He would freeze to death. Jim was a good ice climber, but scaling these sheer 80-foot ice walls would require world-class skills. The harrowing free fall left him challenged by nature's grandeur at its most unforgiving. Trapped on a narrow frozen shelf, deep below daylight, he desperately battled crumbling ice, snow that threatened to bury him alive, and crippling fear of the inescapable chasm below, all the while struggling to save his fatally injured friend. Finally, alone, with little equipment and rapidly dwindling hope, he confronted a fateful choice: the certainty of a slow, lonely death, or the near impossibility of an agonizing climb for life. After an hour, Jim pulled himself together and started to plan his climb. He might die in a fall, but it beat freezing. He secured Mike with a rope in hopes of pulling him out later, took his 5 ice hooks, and started up the wall. Climbing partners did not abandon each other. But Jim Davidson knew that if he didn't leave the body of his friend and climbing partner, Mike Price, on that icy ledge in June of 1992, he would have perished with him. "I don't want to go, Mike," Davidson said in his mind as he knelt next to Mike. "I'm not supposed to go. I'm supposed to stay with you. We're partners and we stick together. But you're gone now, and I'm the only one left. If I'm going to keep living, I've got to get out of here. That means I have to leave you. I'm sorry." I don't want to leave you, but I've got to. If I'm going to get us found, I've got to get myself out of here. But that means I've got to go and I can't take you with me. So you're going to have to stay here for now. I know leaving is the right thing to do, but it feels so wrong. He never had self-belayed. He had only read about it. He fell multiple times, and the safety rope saved him each time. It took 5 brutal, exhausting hours, but Jim Davidson did the impossible. He climbed the sheer wall of ice to get out of the crevasse. Despite being consumed with grief, guilt, and fear, Davidson managed to climb 80 feet of ice, vertical and overhanging, with minimal gear and physical pain to escape the glacial crevasse that had swallowed him and Price hours earlier on the descent of their climb on Mount Rainier. Ironically, as he tried to summon the courage and energy to make the climb, something he'd never done before, let alone by himself, it was Mike who inspired him. "My commitment to him is what drove me up the wall," said Davidson. "I thought if I make it to the lip of the crevasse, collapse and die, I've fulfilled my obligation as a partner. That was what saved me." It had been 3 days since the tragic climbing accident on Mount Rainier. Jim wrote a letter to his best friend. He began, "Dear Mike, I will strive to take this second chance I've been given, unfurl my wings and fly with it, and not turn inward into a dark ball. I will strive to live a strong, forward-moving, vivacious life in your honor." Almost as difficult as climbing out of the crevasse was traveling to Colorado to visit with Mike's parents to relay the horrible news. In the years following the accident, Jim married, had children, and got busy with his job as an environmental engineer. It was years before he climbed again. The memories were too painful, but eventually he quit his engineering job and became an outward-bound climbing instructor. On Sunday, May 20th, 2017, on his second attempt, 54-year-old Jim Davidson stood at the 29,029-foot summit of Mount Everest and remembered that fateful first day of summer 25 years earlier. He had honored his commitment to Mike Price. Today, Jim travels the country sharing his story of resilience and teaching college kids to climb mountains. For Anna Bagenholm, her ski adventure would be one of the greatest miracles in human history. In May 1999, the day couldn't have been more normal. Anna Bagenholm was an adventurous young physician in training who thrived in the snowy landscapes of Norway. Her love for skiing brought her immense joy and a sense of freedom. The 29-year-old Bagenholm and 2 other young doctors set out for a day of skiing in the Kjollen Mountains of Norway. Anna had been doing her residency in Narvik, Norway. Bagenholm and a couple of friends finished up their shifts at the hospital, grabbed their skis, and headed off to hit the slopes. All were devoted skiers and had chosen to do their residencies in Narvik for its proximity to the slopes. They had already spent much of the season getting to know their new neighborhood, shaking off the stress of medical school on the mountains, traversing off-trail nooks and crannies. She was an expert skier, and that day she was skiing with Marie and Torvindum, experienced skiers as well. This was a favorite hill of hers outside Narvik, Norway, and was eager to spend the day doing what she loves. There's nothing more euphoric to a skier than some fresh, untrailed snow, and they decided to head off track to enjoy the fresh powder. Conditions were great. Powder coated the runs, and the Arctic summer sun promised to shine long into the night. The sun cast a warm golden glow over the snow-covered mountains as Anna Bagenholm embarked on her skiing adventure with her friends. The crisp winter air invigorated her as she navigated the winding slopes with skill and grace. She reveled in the breathtaking beauty of the Norwegian landscape, feeling a profound sense of serenity. As Anna descended down a particularly challenging section of the mountain, she encountered a sudden shift in terrain. This is when disaster struck. Bagenholm caught some snow the wrong way and tripped, losing her skis, and is sent flying down the hill. She tumbling downhill, at the mercy of gravity as she has no way of stopping her impending doom. Time seemed to slow down as Anna descended through the air, a mix of fear and adrenaline coursing through her body. The impact of the icy stream below was jarring, shattering the tranquility of the winter landscape. She crashed through the fragile frozen surface, plunging into the frigid water below. She cracked through the frozen stream. The shock of the freezing water enveloped Anna, stealing her breath and numbing her senses. She went headfirst through the ice, She was trapped beneath the thick layer, unable to escape. Panic surged through her, but Anna's training as a physician helped her maintain a modicum of composure. In the freezing water, Anna fought against the urge to succumb to panic. She knew that her body's core temperature was crucial to her survival. With a mixture of fear and determination, she forced herself to take slow, shallow breaths and conserve the precious air trapped beneath her ski helmet, which had become wedged between some rocks. With her breath coming in shallow gasps, Anna knew that her only hope of survival was to conserve her body's core temperature for as long as possible. Every passing second felt like an eternity as Anna battled to stay conscious. The icy water around her continued to sap away her body heat, leaving her trembling and weak. As the minutes ticked by, Anna's mind became a battleground of fear and determination. The dark abyss of the icy stream threatened to claim her. As her body temperature continued to plummet, Anna could feel her muscles growing weaker, her movements sluggish and unresponsive. Seconds later, her friends in shock reached her and saw Bogenholm's skis and feet were sticking out above the ice. They grabbed her boots, preventing her from sinking further, but they couldn't yank her out. Bogenholm struggled upward under the water, searching the undersurface of the ice until she found an air pocket large enough to let her breathe. 7 minutes after she had plunged into the icy waters, they used a cell phone to call for help. 2 rescue teams were dispatched, one to the top of the mountain and one to the bottom. A rescue helicopter was sent out too, but its arrival was going to be delayed as it was already involved with a transfer concerning a sick child. Leading the rescue team from the top was veteran skier Ketil Singstad, who roared as fast as he could down the slope. Miraculously, Anna Bogenholm was able to retain consciousness for 40 minutes. Her clothes got heavier and heavier, soaked through with near-frozen water. Her core temperature plummeted. Her body slipped into cardiac arrest. Eventually, everything went black. The human body performs best at 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, but the world is cold, and plenty of outside forces, air, wind, water, seek to draw the heat away from us. Whenever your body senses this happening, whether on a mildly chilly summer evening or plunging through a frozen stream, the body begins to defend the body temperature. Since air pulls heat away from the surface of the body, blood vessels in your skin begin constricting, shunting blood away from your arms and legs and back to the core, where it stays warm. This is good for overall survival, but not as great for the fingers, toes, and ears, common early victims of frostbite. If this conserved heat isn't enough, the body begins making more warmth the best way it knows how, by working its muscles. You'll likely feel these involuntary shakes first in your chest muscles, then in your arms and legs. This is essentially the body's forced exercise program, generating waves of heat that rewarm the blood. If the body temperature continues to drop, getting down to 95 degrees or lower, hypothermia begins to set in. Blood pressure drops. Breathing becomes shallow. As the brain loses oxygen, it can inspire some strange behavioral symptoms: slurred speech, confusion, and nonsensical actions. When Singstad arrived, he and his team attempted to pull Bogenholm out with a rope, but were unsuccessful. They then tried to dig her out, but their snow shovel could not break through the ice. The rescuers from the bottom arrived with a pointed gardening shovel. Bogenholm was at last freed. She had been in the frigid water for 80 minutes. Her pupils were dilated. Her blood was not circulating, and she was not breathing. Her colleagues gave her CPR until the rescue helicopter finally arrived. Once aboard, she was ventilated with oxygen and treated with a defibrillator, an attempt to jolt her heart back to life with electricity, but she remained ice-cold and unresponsive. When the helicopter landed at University Hospital, Dr. Mads Gilbert, the head of the emergency medical department, feared the worst. "She's ice-cold when I touched her skin, and she looks absolutely dead. On the electrocardiogram, there is a completely flat line, like you could have drawn it with a ruler. No signs of life whatsoever," he said. Even after a couple of hours out of the water, Bogenholm's core temperature was 56.7 degrees Fahrenheit, about 42 degrees below normal. Any attempt to resuscitate Anna further could only proceed in the knowledge that in similar situations past, medical teams had always failed. But Gilbert and his team weren't giving up just yet. "The decision was made," he recalled. "We will not declare her dead until she is warm and dead." He reasoned that Bogenholm's brain may have received enough oxygen from the CPR she was given by her colleagues after the rescue from the ice. Gilbert and his team rushed Bogenholm into an operating room. By the time she reached the operating room, it had been more than 2.5 hours since she first fell into the ice, and her temperature was still at unprecedented levels. They hooked her up to a cardiopulmonary bypass machine, which drew blood from her body, warmed it up, and then reinserted it into her veins. There was a team of more than 100 doctors and nurses who tended to her. Around 4 p.m. the next day, almost a day after Bogenholm had fallen into the river, Bogenholm's heart kicked back into gear, squeezing, releasing, and pumping the now warm blood on its own. Led by her reawakened heart, the rest of Bogenholm's body began the slow process of healing. After 12 days, she opened her eyes, but even when her vital signs improved, the fight had just begun. Anna Bogenholm woke up paralyzed, and her kidneys and digestive systems failed. She spent 2 full months in the intensive care unit. She miraculously suffered no brain damage. Dr. Gilbert thinks the sub-zero temperatures actually helped. Her body had time to cool down completely before the heart stopped. Her brain was so cold when the heart stopped that the brain cells needed very little oxygen, so the brain could survive for quite a prolonged time, he said. But the accident has taken a permanent toll. Nerve damage prevents Bogenholm from having the normal use of her hands. She has trouble writing and cooking and couldn't ride her mountain bike. As time passed, Anna's rehabilitation extended beyond physical healing. She confronted the emotional scars left by her near-death experience, working closely with therapists to process the trauma and find inner peace. The journey toward emotional healing was arduous, but Anna faced it with the same courage and tenacity that carried her through her physical recovery. It took much longer, years, for her to be able to move, walk, and finally even ski again. But eventually, through grit and determination and physical therapy, she did. Her case didn't only make the record books, it also changed the way doctors approached hypothermia deaths. Anna Bogenholm officially set the record for the lowest human body temperature ever recorded. Her historic recovery made the prestigious British medical journal The Lancet and stands as a challenge to doctors confronted with victims of severe hypothermia. In a victim of very deep accidental hypothermia, 9 hours of resuscitation and stabilization led to good physical and mental recovery. This potential outcome should be borne in mind for all such victims, concluded the Lancet study. Before 1999, no patient had survived being frozen to death at the University Hospital of North Norway. But between 1999 and 2013, 9 out of 24 patients survived hypothermic cardiac arrest, a 2014 study led by Gilbert found. Doctors at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center Hospital are now actually inducing hypothermia in critical patients to prolong the window in which they can stop their bleeding and save their lives. Gilbert's bet had paid off. Even as the frigid water had stopped her heart, paralyzed her muscles, and frazzled her nerves, it had preserved her brain. And so thanks to the very thing that might have killed her, Bogenholm didn't freeze to death. She just froze. Bogenholm now works as a senior radiology consultant in the very hospital where her life was once in the balance. Nobody before or since has been so cold and lived to tell the tale. Through her public speaking engagements and interactions with the media, Anna became an inspiration to people worldwide. Her story transcended the boundaries of her own recovery, touching the lives of countless individuals facing their own battles. Anna's courage and resilience became a beacon of hope, demonstrating the remarkable strength of the human spirit. These days, she once again partakes in extreme skiing in the mountains of northern Norway, a living reminder of the human body's capacity for endurance. For Lisala Folau, the will to survive would be one of the greatest stories ever told. Early in the morning, the volcano produced a colossal explosion that triggered a 7.4 magnitude earthquake. A shockwave radiated outward at close to the speed of sound, eventually traveling halfway around the world, and is listed as the loudest sound ever recorded. A tsunami quickly followed that hit Tongatapu, the main island in Tonga, and home to the capital Nuku'alofa. Communications were knocked out as the streets began to flood and people fled for their lives. Lisala Folau lived on the small island of Atata, which is about 5 miles northwest of Tonga's capital. When I heard the loud bangs, I went outside my house. I thought it was thunder at first, but then I heard people chattering about getting to higher ground, Folau said. Atata boasts just one village, with a population of about 70 people. The island's interior consists of high cliffs, which can provide protection against the tsunami. Not long after the eruption Saturday night, Mr. Folau's older brother managed to alert him that a tsunami wave was coming. At this time, Folau was painting in his house. Formerly a carpenter, Folau was disabled, causing both his legs to not properly function. "I believe a baby can walk faster than I," Lisala stated. With a nephew, Lisala's brother helped him climb a tree. As waves crashed through the house, the Folau brothers and Lisala's niece Elisiva and nephew were in a tree and survived the first wave. During a lull in the waves, Lisala's brother told him and Elisiva to stay on the tree while he and his nephew sought help from the houses on higher grounds and to find some youth to help him to that area. Unbeknownst to the impending danger, his niece jumped down from the tree and attempted to get help as well and followed them. When she arrived, the nephew was tasked to assist an elderly woman, while she was tasked to go back and assist Lisala to higher ground. It was a hard task for Elisiva, as it was getting cold and Lisala could barely move. At this time, it was around 7 p.m. Lisala's older brother was running, yelling to them that a big wave was coming. As Lisala turned and looked at the wave, it was a bigger wave than the previous 20-foot wave. "When the wave broke on land just below us, my niece Elisiva and I had nothing to hold on to, and we were swept out to sea," Lisala stated. Out into the dark, the pair floated out to sea, calling out to each other. But it was dark, and neither was visible. He eventually couldn't hear his niece, though he did hear his son calling for him from shore. "The truth is, no son can abandon his father," Folau said. "But for me, as a father, I kept my silence, for if I answered him, he would have jumped in and tried to rescue me. But I understand the tough situation, and I thought if the worst comes, it only comes to me." He continued floating, being bashed by large waves. His mindset was to grab onto a tree or anything that could help him survive, and he found one. This tree was Lisala's lifeline for the night in the open ocean. Folau spent the entire night struggling to stay afloat. If there was any silver lining from this devastating eruption, volcanic ash rain heated the ocean significantly, keeping him warm. He felt ash falling and his hair was full of ash and rocks. Staying afloat was the biggest ordeal, and Lisala was struggling. But his will to live distracted any feeling of thirst or exhaustion. Lisala wanted to live and find his family. The current carried Lisala to a tiny atoll called Tokatok, an uninhabited island around 7 a.m. Sunday morning. This island was less than 3 acres. It was almost bare. The tsunami stripped away most of the trees. He saw a police patrol boat heading to Atata, prompting him to grab a rag and wave toward it. He remained unseen. He was beside himself, not knowing what happened to his family. This gave him a burst of energy and decided to swim to the island of Poloa. He began his swim, back into the ocean at about 10 a.m. Miraculously, Lisala made the 8-hour, 4-mile swim to the island. When he made it ashore, called and yelled for help, but there was no one there. This was another uninhabited island. He was worried about his niece at this time and looked frantically for any sign of her. He felt another burst of energy as his concerns went to his sister with diabetes and his youngest daughter who has heart problems. Most would stay put and wait in hope for rescue. In a survival situation of this nature, this would be the correct and best decision to stay alive. But Lisala wasn't worried about the danger he is going to put himself in. He made the decision to swim to Sopu, on the western edge of Nuku'alofa, on the main island of Tongatapu, a 1.5-mile swim. All these thoughts were racing in my mind, and what was the point now? I have survived, but what about them? He said. This drove me to get to Sopu. So back in the ocean, Lisala Folau went for a grueling swim, fueled by love, grief, and the will to survive and see his family again. At about 9 p.m., after more than 5 miles of swimming in the open ocean, Lisala Folau, the 57-year-old disabled grandfather, made it to the main island. An incredible feat an Olympic swimmer would struggle with. He swam ashore on a beach near a home in Sopu. He later found a piece of timber he used as a walking stick, eventually flagging down a vehicle and explaining that he was washed away from Atata and was trying to contact his family. The driver of the vehicle took Folau to his village and told them who he was. The people of the village were stunned. Later on, Folau arrived at a relative's home on Tongatapu, where his evacuated family was staying. They were overjoyed to see him alive. They were planning his funeral and had told his wife, who was in Australia at the time he was dead. "My family stayed up all night singing hymns because I had miraculously survived," Lisala stated. When the story of Lisala Folau reached the news, his incredible story captivated people the world over. His story went viral on social media, hailing him as a real-life Aquaman. Lisala would later give an interview to recount the miraculous survival story. "The scariest part to me during the ordeal was when the waves took me from land into the sea," he said. "What came into my mind when I was helpless at sea were two things. One is that I still had faith in God. Two is my family. I thought about my family and what they were thinking. They probably assumed I was dead. I have faith in my God, and I left everything to the will of God and His plans for me. And if He wants me to live to see my family, it is up to Him. I give praise and glory to God because He gave me the opportunity to see my family again." The people of Atata were relocated and resettled to the main island of Tongatapu, as their island was devastated by tsunami waves caused by the eruption and remained vulnerable to future tsunamis and cyclones. Unfortunately, there's not much information on the death toll on Atata, or if all of Lisala's family survived. The settlement for the Atata people opened on December 20th, 2022. Many of the people of Atata lived a simple subsistence lifestyle, reliant on their renowned fishing skills. But now, they must adapt to a new life on the main island. This adjustment has been challenging for some. "I really want to go back," Lisala Folau said, "but I know it's a foolish thing to do because I would be putting myself and my family at risk." For Angela Hernandez, she would experience an ordeal of nightmares. On July 5, 2018, 23-year-old Angela started the 16-hour drive from Portland, Oregon to Lancaster, California. She was driving alone and headed down to visit with her older sister. While many drivers would take the much quicker I-5 route through California, Angela took the much more scenic PCH. Her drive was going to be a beautiful one, down PCH with views of the coastline. Angela was close to her family and kept in touch regularly. About 10 hours after she left home, Angela decided to pull off for the night and find a place to park and get some sleep. She parked her Jeep Patriot behind a Safeway grocery store near Half Moon Bay, California, and texted her sister to let her know where she was, and that was she going to get some sleep before continuing her journey the next day. The next morning, Angela woke up, drove to a gas station in Carmel to fill up, and headed on her way to her sister's. The weather was perfect. Headed down one of the most picturesque drives around. All seemed right with the world. Angela would never make it there. By nightfall, when Angela didn't arrive at the time she indicated, her family attempted to reach her in any way they can, calling, texting, and trying social media, but they are still met with silence. That night, when they still couldn't reach Angela and she didn't show up in Lancaster as planned, they reported her missing. Authorities searched up and down the PCH with no sightings. Sometime around noon on July 6, 2018, Angela Hernandez was in the final half of the drive down to her sister's. She was passing through Big Sur when suddenly a small animal appeared from nowhere and ran in front of her car. Instinct took over and she automatically swerved to miss it, the sharp yank on the steering wheel, making her lose control and lunge toward the cliff edge. And over the ledge she went, tumbling noisily 250 feet down to the rocky beach below, a beach that was so isolated and devoid of human life that she would be lucky to be found by anyone anytime soon. When her car came to a stop, she was out cold, knocked unconscious by the brutal bone-jarring crash landing. Angela regained consciousness to a nightmare scenario, rising seawater lapping around her feet, her seatbelt strapping her tightly to the seat, and all the electric windows wound up, preventing the water from leaking out. She was in excruciating pain and was losing air from her lungs. These were definitely life-threatening injuries, and her chances of survival were slim, not a soul in sight to offer any first aid. Amazingly, under these dire conditions, she didn't panic, realizing that a cool head was needed in order to get out of the car before the water hit the roof. Searching under the surface of the water, which was now above her knees, she located the multi-tool kept under the chair and broke the driver's side window. Somehow, she managed to drag herself out and swim painfully towards the beach, just in time before she passed out. This was just the start of her nightmare. Her first sight upon waking up, battered, shoeless, clothes and skin ripped and torn, was the sheer, unscalable cliffs surrounding the beach. She could see cars passing by on the road overhead, yet her yells for help went unheard. She was trapped on a desolate beach that few, if any, people visited, and no way to call for help. The next few days became a blur for Angela. She'd walk up and down the beach in search of another human being, climb on rocks to avoid the sharp sand, walk along the shore to avoid the hot rocks, and gather tiny crabs for food. She found a high spot she was able to climb and found herself there almost every day. She could see cars driving across the cliff, and felt like if she could yell just loud enough, one would hear or see her. She'd stay there until the sun became unbearable, and then find a way to slide back down to the shore. About 3 days had passed, back of her jeans was torn apart, her socks were nothing but holes, and starting to feel the effects of dehydration. She returned to the mangled Jeep and started looking around for anything she could use. She found a 10-inch black hose that broke off during the crash. She walked farther south down the beach when she heard a dripping sound. As she looked up, she saw a huge patch of moss, and to her delight, there was moisture dripping from it. She caught the water in my hands and tasted it, and it was fresh. Using the hose, she drank the water, and this became her lifeline for the duration of the ordeal. Every day her routine would be to walk up and down the beach, looking for new high grounds, screaming help at the top of her lungs, and collecting water falling from the top of the cliffs. Every night she'd find the highest point she could climb up, and find somewhere to fall asleep before the tide would rise. Every morning she would wake up soaked in sea mist and watch the sunrise. As the days passed, it would be a lie to say that things got easier, just more predictable. Songs she heard in years would play on repeat inside her head. She would daydream of foods to eat once found and imagine the face of the person who would eventually find her. One morning on the beach was an especially good one. She woke up in the middle of the night because of shoulder pain, but looked up and noticed the Big Dipper in the sky. She walked to her usual spots on the beach and started looking at everything a little bit differently. She had a good feeling about this day. She fell asleep between some big rocks. The day was warm and she woke up before the sun had gone down. When she sat up, she saw a woman walking across the shore. She thought it was a dream, but it wasn't. This was Chelsea Moore and her husband Chad Moore, who were walking along the beach off the Big Sur coast when they spotted a piece of the wrecked SUV. "We saw a bumper first and we were like, there's a bumper," Chelsea Moore said. "That's weird." And then came around another bend and saw the car. The Moores began picking scattered debris from the car, including its license plate, to turn over to the police. They then headed back to their campsite about 1 or 2 miles from the car along the beach and spotted Angela. "We turned around and Angela was right there in the rocks, just looked like hell," Chad Moore said. "She was happy at the same time. She was really happy to see us." The couple gave Hernandez food and blankets until emergency responders arrived. Chad stayed with Angela while Chelsea ran back to the campground to call for help. Angela was severely injured. When Chelsea arrived back at the campground, she immediately saw a missing flyer poster and realized the girl they found had been stuck there for a week. First responders had to rappel down to Angela. When they arrived, they treated her for her immediate injuries. A California Highway Patrol helicopter was used to airlift her in a special stretcher out of the area and to Twin Cities Community Hospital in Templeton, California. It was then that Angela learned the extent of her injuries. Hernandez would later learn from doctors that she was suffering from a brain hemorrhage during the first few days after the crash. She also had 4 broken ribs, fractures in both of her collarbones, a collapsed lung, ruptured blood vessels in her eyes, and extreme sunburn on her hands, feet, and face. Angela shortly after would write about her ordeal. She stated, "But at the end of the day, none of that matters. I feel like I have everything I've ever wanted. I'm sitting here in the hospital laughing with my sister until she makes broken bones hurt. I've met some of the most beautiful human beings that I think I'll ever meet in my entire life. I've experienced something so unique and terrifying. I can't imagine that there isn't a bigger purpose for me in this life. I don't know, you guys, life is incredible. For Harrison O'Keefe, the Gulf of Guinea would be a tomb of dread. On May 26, 2013, stormy weather caused rough waters off the coast of Nigeria. The tugboat Jaskin 4 rocked on the dark water as it carried out an important mission. The 12-man crew was there to secure a 700-foot oil tanker full of gasoline that had just been collected from the Chevron platform. As part of the $3 billion industry that extracts 238,000 gallons of oil from the ocean yearly, the massive tanker was being thrown around on the rough waters. The Jaskin 4 was called to fix a line to the tanker to keep it from capsizing and releasing thousands of gallons of oil into the ocean. Although the oil tanker was massive compared to the Jaskin 4, it couldn't withstand the force of Mother Nature. The crew on the tugboat didn't seem too concerned about the dangerous waters because they were used to going on these types of missions in similar conditions. It didn't occur to them that they were also in danger. Among the crew was 29-year-old Harrison O'Keefe. He was the cook on the Jaskin 4 and had been on missions like this several times. He knew the risks of being in dangerous waters next to massive oil tankers like the one the crew was helping that day. O'Keefe knew that as long as he cooked good food and didn't make the captain sick, his job was secure. On the morning of May 26, 2013, he awoke at 5 a.m. to start prepping food like every other day on the boat. He sleepily got out of bed and headed to the bathroom. He felt the way most people feel when they have to wake up at 5 a.m. on a Sunday. Shortly after O'Keefe sat down to do his morning business, a huge wave smacked into the side of the Jaskin 4. It sprayed the deck with water and cracked pieces of the hull. The massive wave hit the Jaskin 4 with so much force that it flipped the tugboat on its side. O'Keefe was still in the bathroom and he was thrown out of the stall as the boat started sinking. He rushed out of the bathroom and ran down the hall to the emergency hatch. 3 of his crewmates were already trying to seal off that hatch, but a huge wave of freezing water hit them. They were carried into the abyss, and O'Keefe knew the men were dead. Trapped below deck, he had no time to think, with his only escape route blocked by rushing water. He had nowhere to go. O'Keefe fought against the current to get to the officer's cabin. However, the water was too strong. It pushed him back into the bathroom attached to the captain's room and against a wall as the waves rolled the boat upside down. The Jaskin 4 started sinking to the bottom of the ocean, but something strange happened along the way. O'Keefe didn't drown. As water filled the room, he swam up and got caught in a 4-foot air bubble. It was completely dark, so Harrison O'Keefe hung on as the tugboat sank further. It seemed like the boat had been sinking for hours when it finally settled on the ocean floor. Harrison was sweating even in the freezing water because he was terrified. He was trapped in what he thought would be his watery grave. Harrison couldn't move from his air bubble. He had to tread water or use his strength to hold his head above the water. He maintained his breathing because he knew his oxygen was limited. He had no food, light, or water and was practically nude in freezing water. Initially, he thought there was no way anyone would find him because everyone else on board was dead. But Harrison O'Keefe refused to give up, knowing the freezing water or excessive carbon monoxide would eventually take him. He didn't know what to do, so he just prayed. O'Keefe said, "All around me was just black and noisy. I was crying and calling on Jesus to rescue me. I prayed so hard. I was so hungry and thirsty and cold, and I was just praying to see some kind of light." When the Jaskin 4 flipped, Nigerian rescue crews got the Mayday call. But they couldn't do anything because the storm was too strong. There wouldn't have been time to perform a rescue operation before the boat started sinking. It left O'Keefe in a tough spot. While he waited underwater, hoping someone would find him, rescue crews knew there wasn't much they could do when it sunk. Even when the weather cleared, there were still hazards, with someone swimming inside the upside-down ship at the bottom of the ocean. Harrison had no idea how far down the boat had sunk, and didn't know rescuers even knew something had happened. Unfortunately, the Jaskin 4 was sitting 100 feet below the surface. Professional scuba divers are not allowed to dive deeper than 100 feet for more than 20 minutes. If rescuers tried to go inside the sunken tugboat, it would take longer than 20 minutes to retrieve bodies and inspect the ship. Meanwhile, Mr. O'Keefe was starving, freezing, and pruning like a raisin. He had to hold onto a sink to keep his head above water. Harrison was struggling to stay above the water because he was growing tired. He knew he needed to get out of the water and rest because the salt was peeling his skin. He decided to make a risky move, using his last bit of strength to swim into the officer's cabin. He swam into the darkness, avoiding dangerous obstacles, and collected whatever wooden objects he could find. Mr. O'Kaney made a few trips to gather enough wood to fashion a small raft. It wasn't anything great, but it floated and got him out of the water. The small raft allowed O'Kaney to dry off, warm up, and rest his aching muscles. He was left alone with his thoughts, reviewing his life until that point. The only sounds he heard were his breath and the water hitting the sides of the cabin. It was so quiet that Harrison could hear his dead crew members being eaten by fish and other unseen sea life. Harrison thought about how much time he had left and wondered if anyone would find him. He thought about his family and friends. O'Kaney lay on his makeshift raft for nearly 3 days. All he could do was pray and wait for a slow death when the oxygen ran out. He lost track of time lying there, and hours felt like days. He didn't know if anyone would find him or if anyone was even looking. He didn't know when his time would come, and he would be laid to rest with his crew. Luckily, that moment didn't come. After almost 3 days, a South African dive team was able to get down to the wreckage. They salvaged what they could, swimming through the depths in full gear with flashlights. The divers found the bodies of 10 dead crew members who didn't make it out of the wreckage. The divers then headed into the ship to investigate. They swam through the dark wreckage of the Jascon 4. As the divers were looking around, Harrison heard a noise he hadn't heard before. O'Kaney was so shocked when he heard a metallic tapping on the ship. He knew he was running out of oxygen, so he got off his raft and tore the faucet from the sink. He pulled himself up and started banging the faucet against the ceiling. He wanted to make as much noise as possible so the divers would know someone was alive. Harrison O'Kaney worried if they didn't hear him, the divers would leave him to die. He also worried that the divers would mess up whatever was keeping the air bubble intact. O'Kaney made as much noise as possible. Moments later, he saw a flashlight down the hallway. It was the first light he had seen in nearly 3 days. He didn't want to scare the diver and cause a problem, so O'Kaney gently tapped him as he swam by. Harrison worried the diver would try to stab him, thinking he was being attacked by a creature from the deep. Although the diver was startled, they were happy to see someone alive. Harrison O'Kaney had become an accidental aquanaut. His rescue was captured on a dive camera, showing him reaching out to the diver and standing in the small air bubble. He was only in his underwear and more than ready to end this horrifying ordeal. On May 28th, 62 hours after the Jascon 4 capsized and sank, Harrison O'Kaney was on his way to the surface. He was starving, dangerously dehydrated, and exhausted. The divers equipped him with a rebreather and oxygen tank, guiding him out of the wreckage and toward the surface. He used his last ounce of strength to swim with them, but he couldn't get out of the water just yet. Harrison had been underwater for so long and inhaled so much nitrogen that bringing him straight to the surface would have killed him immediately. Before O'Kaney could resurface, he had to enter a decompression chamber. Harrison was guided to a diving bell designed to maintain internal pressure to transfer him to the decompression chamber. He lost consciousness during the transfer, but survived. He suffered from peeling skin due to prolonged saltwater exposure. The decompression chamber adjusts the body to normal air pressure after spending time in the deep ocean. After 3 days at the bottom of the ocean, Harrison O'Kaney had to spend 60 hours in the chamber. Even though the decompression chamber was small, it was an improvement from his air bubble. O'Kaney also dealt with recurring nightmares and insatiable hunger, but otherwise he was in good health. He thought at least a few of his crewmates got off the boat before it sank, but soon learned he was the sole survivor. On June 1st, 2013, O'Kaney was finally released from the hospital. He was able to go home and see his family after thinking he would never hug them again. The terrifying underwater ordeal is believed to be the longest any human has ever survived, trapped underwater. People trapped in closed rooms face serious problems because the concentration of carbon dioxide rises when they start breathing. The level rises until it becomes toxic, and a person can suffocate within a few hours. However, O'Kaney survived for 3 days. Although he was happy to see his mother and wife again, Harrison had to deal with PTSD and anxiety for a while. He would wake up in the middle of the night feeling like his bed was sinking. Harrison had worked on boats for years before the Jaskin 4 sank. However, the ordeal made him say he would never go into the ocean again. He suffered for a few years before he decided to overcome his fear of the ocean. After almost 2 years of staying out of the water, Mr. O'Kenny became a certified commercial diver in 2015. The rescue diver who discovered him in the wrecked ship presented O'Kenny with his diving certificate. It was a heartwarming moment and a new chapter of his journey. Since getting back in the water, O'Kenny has found a newfound love for the ocean and diving. He is now an IMCA Class II commercial air diver and can dive to depths of 160 feet. Harrison said, "I am enjoying diving. It's life for me. It's fun." Although he was once scared of the ocean, Harrison O'Kenny enjoys being in the water now. No one could have imagined that he would get back in the water and feel comfortable after what he went through. He worked hard to overcome his fears. For Brett Archibald, the Mentawai Strait would be a place of pending doom. It began on a surfing trip to Mentawai Island with 9 friends in the Mentawai Strait near Indonesia's West Sumatra province in April 2013. A group of friends who've known each other since they were 5 years old started doing this trip when they were younger. Mentawai Island is off the west coast of Sumatra. You fly to a tiny little town called Padang, then jump on a boat. Surfing on Mentawai Island is a mecca for surfers. Featured in countless surf movies and magazines with perfect waves and endless barrels, visiting this island is one of the most sought-after surfing trips on the planet. Before heading out to the island, they bought 3 extra-large calzone pizzas at a local eatery. But as they opened the calzone, it had a putrid odor. But one of the friends, Mauritius, who's lovingly called by his friends Banger, promptly eats half his portion. Brett took a few bites, but it tasted disgusting. "That thing is poison, it's water buffalo, and it's rancid," Archibald said. Fast forward a few hours, they got into their boat and headed downriver before heading out to sea. Brett was tired and wanted to get some good sleep before a big day of surfing ahead of him. Brett woke up at 1:30 a.m. in the morning with a sick feeling in his stomach. He promptly gets up, stumbles to the bathroom, and begins vomiting. "I was hot and sweating and thought I have to get to some fresh air," Brett said. He walked to the back of the boat, and there was Banger, lying on the lower level of the boat, seawater and diesel fumes washing all around him. He helped him up to the top deck. Then Archibald went to the side of the boat over the railing and began vomiting again. After the 3rd time, Brett says to himself, "If I vomit again, I'm going to black out." Green with sickness, slouched over the railing at the mercy of his internal organs to fight off the poison. Brett feels it coming again. Archibald blacks out. The next thing he knew, he was in the water, tumbling around. He fell 20 feet off the top deck, hit the water, and was sucked under the boat. Eventually, he made it to the surface. As he looks around, he sees a devastating sight. He swam with everything he had. "I just watched the lights of the boat disappear." He screamed with everything he had, but realized very quickly that they were never going to hear him. As the boat continued into the distance, he stares up at the sky, his ears pricking up at the sound of an animalistic cry that was coming from within. No one had seen him fall overboard. His first thought was that he was going to die. It was dark, and he was alone in the middle of the ocean. Brett Archibald will never forget the feeling of doom while watching a charter boat sail away into darkness after he fell overboard in the Indian Ocean. "I get goosebumps just reliving it," he recounts. But Archibald didn't panic. He started to do the math, figuring it would be at least 7 hours until his friends realized he was missing, and about another 7 hours until they were able to return to his location. So with this grim realization, he started reciting cell phone contacts, went through his book and CD collections, title by title, and sang Elton John songs while swimming with the current to keep his mind occupied. As a surfer, endurance athlete, and strong swimmer, he knew that he needed to take a deep breath and swim through any oncoming waves. As the hours passed, he began to fight cramps, dehydration, and the stings of jellyfish. He fell asleep. He was woken by a violent smash to the back of his head. He was being attacked by a seagull. His left eye and nose exploded in blood and feathers. Then he saw a second seagull. They circled around him, dive-bombing and squawking, straight out of a scene from the movie The Birds. He had the idea that he could catch one and drink the blood for some type of subsistence. By then they flew off. The silver lining from this attack was it gave him hope. Seagulls roost on land, so that meant the direction he was floating was towards land. It was not Brett's only encounter with life out in the ocean. About 14 hours in, he sees his mates. The boat is about 250 meters away from him. It stops. He could see his friends' faces, their anguish and worry patrolling around the deck looking from Brett. He was screaming at the top of his lungs, splashing the water, trying to get their attention. He's sure they see him. A few minutes later, the engine starts up and his friends take off. He was demoralized. Around 15 hours after first falling overboard, he felt a bump to the back of his left kidney. He thought it was a barracuda initially, but the thing nudged him again. It was a shark. He thought it looked the size of a bus. But he was scared and his mind was exaggerating things. He caught a glimpse of the shark. The fear and exhaustion were almost overwhelming. Thinking he was going to die from a shark attack, Brett was beginning to feel like giving up. But his surfing and boating training took over. Then he noticed the black edgings of its vertical fin. It was a black-tip reef shark. As a keen surfer in South Africa, where the shark also resides, he knew it was not a risk to humans and would not be his cause of death, but perhaps his means of rescue. Brett began plotting how to hold on to the shark, hoping it would pull him closer to shore. He found new hope in the burst of opportunity. Then the shark lost interest and swam away. Even though he was attacked by seagulls and had a scary encounter with a shark, the tiny little silver fish that nibbled his skin was the most painful of the ordeal. The backs of his legs were raw from kicking against his shorts, and the fish got to the raw flesh and started eating. He couldn't get them away no matter how he kicked, screamed, and splashed the water. "It was the most horrendous thing I've ever felt in my life, ever," Archibald said. The adrenaline rush from the shark encounter left him completely exhausted. He truly believed he could not go on any longer. He was becoming despondent, coming up with crazy ideas of writing a note to his wife in his skin, but later realized sharks would be attracted to him. But he kept swimming. He knew the currents would be his savior. All currents lead to land, so he kept following the current, swimming breaststroke, trying to keep his head above water. He was running out of energy very quickly. At one point, he was so dejected he swam down, trying to drown himself. He couldn't, so he laid on his back and filled his lungs with water 3 times. He spits the water out. Then he thought, "I'm not going to do this. I needed to fight for my family." Then he started to hallucinate. He saw the Virgin Mary in this cloud, a 1634 Dutch East India schooner. He could hear the rigging creaking, guys on ladders down the side of the boat. They even spoke to him. They said, "Swim, young man." Meanwhile, after his friends saw he had not arrived for breakfast, they contacted the Indonesian Coast Guard, who coordinated a search and rescue effort. One of the boats that joined in the rescue efforts was headed by Aussie skipper Tony Doris Eltherington, captain of the Barrenjoey. Eltherington, a surfing legend in the 70s, sailed the world surfing alone and now runs a charter in the Mentawai Islands, a sea salt of the ocean. There was only one rule Tony lived by: never leave anyone behind. When he heard of the missing surfer, he had to go searching for him. "I just think it's the right thing to do," Tony says. "I wasn't going to give up on him, no way." Tony docks from the small village on the Mentawai Island to Apajet. He plotted a search area and organized a search party with 4 other Australian boats, while the Indonesian Coast Guard gave up on the search and left him for dead. Tony didn't. He knew that in the warm, tropical waters of the Indian Ocean, someone could survive for a while. Tony noticed that the current was running north, not south, as it usually does. So on a hunch, Tony turns the Barrenjoey around and heads north. Brett Archibald was having feelings again of drowning himself. It's been 27 hours, and he felt he couldn't go on any longer. So he swam down to drown himself, but he couldn't do it. When he surfaced, he saw this little red cross. He thought he was hallucinating again. So he had a conversation with God. He thought he was taunting him again, so he told him to shove the cross where it fits best. But slowly this cross got bigger and bigger, and he clearly saw the mast. He screamed. Then he heard the roar of the boat and realized they'd spotted him. They changed course and sailed to him, shaking and in pain, his eyes swollen and his feet, lips, and hands nearly bloodless. He was rescued and taken for a medical assessment nearby. He had lost nearly 13 pounds in the water. A medic on board estimated that he only had about another hour to live if he wasn't rescued. He returned to his mates, had a meal, and went to sleep. He woke up 5 hours later. The boat was like a morgue because everybody was so exhausted from the ordeal. They believed their friend was dead. He went and sat on the little bench where he fell overboard, thinking, how did this happen? Then he started sobbing. The captain of their boat was awake, and he came and put his arms around Brett's shoulders and started sobbing as well, the two of them. As dawn was rising, he said to the skipper, "You have to put me back in the ocean. There's no way. I'm tying you to the boat if I have to." He believed he would never go back into the ocean if he didn't do it right away. So the next day, after spending 27 hours stranded in the open ocean, Brett Archibald went back into the sea and spent hours sitting on his surfboard, climbing off, swimming in the ocean, and riding waves. In every triumph over adversity and every act of healing and rejuvenation, we inscribe a resplendent testament to the power of human potential. We harness the forces of science, the embrace of community, and the resilience of the human spirit to weave a narrative that transcends the boundaries of mortality. Each moment lived beyond expectation is a brushstroke on the canvas of eternity, a masterpiece of defiance against the finality of death. So, let us continue to chart uncharted waters, scale towering peaks, and traverse unexplored realms. Let our collective spirit soar as we venture forth, driven by an unwavering desire to expand the frontiers of existence. Thank you for watching, and remember to stay safe on your excursions and avoid an outdoor disaster.